Oh, you can really see my nipples through this shirt.
Yeah, you really can, man. That's a nip. That's the nip slit.
I
It's so
almost said
thin.
something.
It's crazy.
They're really sharp. It's
Yeah.
the thinnest shirt I've ever seen. Is that like a cheesecloth?
I've had it for 10 years. Been through the wash.
Oh my God, dude. I can see your,
I think you should stop at 10 years, man.
I can see the picture behind you through the shirt. If you do one layer,
Up
just one
here.
layer, I can straight up see, yeah,
Did they not use enough threads in the
is
shirt?
that? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Anyways, we should start the episode 40. Breaking news.
Let's start with utility. I don't understand what it even means.
Everybody has some kind of utils in their head that they're calibrating.
There's hardly anything that hasn't been used for money.
In fact, there may be a fundamental problem in modeling what I want to model.
Epic
What? They
finally
did?
wins its epic case.
They won?
I don't know if they like won one, but my understanding of the situation, and Phil, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is Apple won, and then they were like big dicks about it, and then the courts were like, "Wait, you can't be a big dick about it." No, or something like
But so
that.
This
Like,
is the thing where.
Epic
Okay.
didn't
All right,
win,
all right,
but
all right. Let's rewind. Let's rewind. Let's rewind. Let's rewind. Let's go back. I think it's 2021 where the lawsuit starts. So if you remember, there's Project Liberty at Epic, which was them implementing an update to Fortnite Mobile on iOS and Android. And what it did is it showed that when you went to the IEP store to make a purchase in Fortnite to buy virtual currency, you saw the price to purchase a virtual currency on a web store that they had implemented, that you could do it via the web, which was a violation of Apple's rules. So for people that are unfamiliar, there's something called anti-steering. And anti-steering is basically preventing people from telling users that there's lower prices elsewhere for the same good or service. And so Apple prevents you from telling anyone that there's another price for this. Because if you remember, like, you can have dual linking, right? So you could, for instance, play Call of Duty Warzone. And if you make a purchase on Call of Duty Warzone on the desktop, and then you log in the mobile app, you're still going to have that hard currency available to you. They have an exception called the Reader app exception, which is how a lot of people were doing this. But you could still have the same situation with a web store. So if I went to the desktop and I made a purchase on the web for hard currency, and then I logged back into the mobile app, then I was able to access the hard currency. And so what Apple banned you from doing is telling users that there was this other price.
mm-hmm.
So even if, for instance, you collect an email address during sign up, Apple prevented you from using that email address to tell people that there's a web store which they could get lower prices at. So this is all this anti-steering shit. So when Epic sued, they sued on a bunch of different criteria. And what they ended up winning on was the anti-steering rule. And so what the Judge Gonzalez decided, and this is under what's called the unfair competition law in California. This was really smart for them to go to California to basically use it as a fulcrum wedge to get this law applied. So she issued this injunction, and the anti-steering thing said you could have a link out, right? So I could go to a mobile app and I could have a link to a web store in the mobile app where I can make that purchase. And Apple put all these fucking rules around it. And one of the fucking rules they put on it, and this is where the judge just gets absolutely irate in this 80-page ruling. What Apple did is they said that if you wanted this link out, you had to apply for it. It's called the entitlement program. And when you applied for it, Apple would approve it. And what they said is that if a user clicks the link that has this web store in it and they make a purchase, Apple is entitled to 27% of the revenue that they make. And it's fucking worse, because what would happen is that Apple claims that if you click this link, right? If you click this link and let's say you don't make a purchase, but then you're on your desktop, let's say you click the link on your mobile app on Monday. And then on Friday, you go to the desktop and you decide you want to make a purchase for that mobile game. Apple claims that within 7 days of you clicking that link, any revenue you make, they are entitled to 27%. And this happened in the Netherlands because they had the different series of laws in South Korea. And so the judge was like, what the flying fuck are you
They're
guys
like doing
doing?
the opposite. They're like probably getting more money, right?
Exactly. And not only that, what we saw in the court documents is that there was all this fucking internal conversation that they specifically chose 27% be unprofitable for anyone to pursue.
So explicitly anti-competitive. Yeah.
Sorry, I've been waiting to say this.
No, that I forgot that, like, the subtle if you go.
And then they also have this too, right?
Oh, it's so bad, Eric, because you go through the court documents and Apple was specifically designing the screens for when you would go to the web store when you're in the mobile app as being as scary as possible. And so there's a quote from a UX designer, a direct quote from a UX designer, where they're going through different potential mock-ups for the scare screens. And he says, oh my God, what if instead of saying link out, we said go, or hold on, let me pull up the quote. Let me pull up the quote because it's just so fucking good. Let me pull up the quote. This is where they're timed.
I mean,
by the way,
we're certainly
the
going in
ruling's
the
super
podcast.
readable. Yeah, for sure. The ruling is something else, man. It's very readable. She says there will be no second bite of the apple at the end of the ruling, and she's got other zingers in there.
Holy
Man.
shit, that's the craziest.
Okay, here's what. So here's what this is an exact quote from the case. This is internal Apple documents that were discovered during the discovery process. And for people unfamiliar, what happens in a law case is that when you're suing, you have the right to evidence that the person you're suing has in the discovery process. And if you want to get internal emails, what you can do is you submit search terms, and the defendant has to, and Epic as well, they have to give you documents related to that search term. And so what people do, and this also happened in this case, is that they add a lawyer to basically all of the email threads, and adding a lawyer makes the thread privileged, client attorney privileged, so it's not admissible during the discovery process. And so the other thing that happened is they started to look into some of this because they were claiming that all these fucking documents were privileged documents, and Apple was clearly abusing this. And after they started to look into this, they retracted 50% of the things that they said were privileged. 50%. And so Judge Gonzalez was not happy about this. Okay, here's the UX quote from the UX designer. If we want to scare users a bit, I like the addition of out because it raises the questions of hesitancy. Out where? Oh my God, what do I do?
Damn.
Dude, that is insane. It makes me like, you think about all the emails that you send or stuff where you're like, oh, how can we make more money? Oh, geez. Now I'm scared. Not that I work at a company that would ever be.
But so then what did the judge say to Apple this time? Or what's the new ruling?
So a couple things. Yeah, so they had this injunction. And so Epic was basically like, look, they're not following the injunction. And so they went through another discovery process. And this is where all of the internal conversation about how Apple was going to comply with the injunction comes out. This is where you get all the text messages, the emails. And so what happens is like one of the VPs at Apple directly lied under oath about what their conversations were in terms of responding to the injunction and trying to execute it. And they're basically trying to sabotage. I know you just mentioned they use it to enhance their position, not inhibit it, because they had the 7-day link out bullshit. And so the judge is recommending criminal proceedings for the on the Apple executive who lied under oath, and they absolutely lied under oath. I will tell you, like I've been following Tim Sweeney, the CEO of Epic, on Twitter, and every time he would talk about this, he just seemed unhinged, just completely unhinged. I'm like, dude, come on, man. Like, I get they want you to play by their rules in their playground, and they're dumb and they're bad. But after reading this court document, I'd become radicalized. I'm like, fucking shank these people. Shank Caesar, let them bleed. I'm Tim raged.
What's the result now? Obviously, they got a judge who finally saw the case and was like, this is fucked up. Because I can imagine a scenario where you get a judge who's not quite as favorable to Epic. What's the result? Now you can link out to your web store, get 100% of those profits.
Let's look at this together. So I'm about to share my screen. We're going to go through the greatest hits of the ruling. Here, let me get it. It's right now, for those watching on the YouTube version, we got the text of the ruling, the restrains and enjoins. And so there's 6 key things that come out of this injunction. So what Judge Gonzalez says is that imposing any commission or fee on purchases customers make outside the app, not allowed. So that 27% we just talked about, Apple can never take any share of anything that happens outside the web store is what she says. She also says Apple cannot limit how you choose to communicate those prices to players. So you can have that side-by-side that we were just mentioning Fortnite ad in the app. So you can say, hey, look, it's $5 off on the web store, which, by the way, Spotify launched that update today. They did.
They had it in
it's
the
crazy
hopper.
how fast they moved on this. They had it in the hopper. The other thing you can do here is that you can also now have dynamic links. So the other thing that Apple restricted is that when you clicked that web store link out, it was a static link. And the reason you want dynamic links is that you want to know, for instance, if they hit it at this part of the UI or hit it at this part of the UI, or you might want to personalize to the user ID, just like you want attribution. And so they prevented
That's
that.
crazy.
Can't do that anymore.
What was the static link thing all about? Like, why would, like, insane?
Yes. Just to make this as painful as possible. It's in the documents. You can read the actual emails from the Apple executives and the internal notes Apple had trying to sabotage this.
I didn't even look at Apple stock. Did they take a hit from this?
They did take a hit. So the other thing that's really entertaining about this whole situation is that it's the Q2 earnings calls. So all these CEOs are fielding calls about this. And Tim Cook took a call about this on the earnings call, and it was super awkward and weird. And I'm really looking forward to getting the transcripts of what
it
he
looks like
actually
number 4
said.
means no more approval process. Anyone can link to a web store.
That is also correct. You
Which,
do not have to apply
if
anymore.
they have monopoly power to say who can link out, then they could just say nobody can fucking link out. That's insane.
Yep.
So number 4 is essential.
Yep. And the other thing is that you cannot do scare screens anymore, as we were talking about. No more scare screens.
Are you sure you want to click on this link?
It goes
It
out.
could be dangerous.
Do you want to go outside?
Well, as the UX designer said, out to where?
Consumers. Restricting a developer's use of dynamic links consumer to a specific product page. That's pretty similar
In a
to,
logged in state? Basically,
uh,
like it'll automatically log you
number.
into the web store as opposed to forcing you to log in again.
Oh, so you don't have to. So
Correct.
will I be able to sign up for Spotify Premium in the app now? Because I remember that was always like a funny thing with Spotify. You go to try and do premium, and they'd be like, "Yeah, you can't do that on the app. Sorry."
Yeah.
What's
So
that
to
problem?
quickly recap on that, if you remember, Apple normally takes 30% of IEP purchases. Now, remember they had the rule where if you make less than $1 million, I think it was 15% or 0, but it wasn't a marginal tax bracket system. It
was
wasn't
just
on
a
the
flat
first
blanket?
1 million, everyone gets this. It was like you had to have exactly. So you actually had this cliff where if you made more than $1 million, it actually became unprofitable for you. There was like the dead zone. It wasn't a marginal tax system. Steam actually does remember the marginal tax system now. They have the inverse marginal brackets. So it's 30%, but then I think if you cross 50 million, it becomes 25. This was like the most fucked up version of this possible. And so what Apple ended up doing for subscriptions a while back, though, is that if you subscribed in app, right, you would actually end up only having to share 15% of users' revenue after 1 year. And this was a direct response to competitive pressure, exactly for what you're talking about, Chris, which is that Spotify stopped putting in-app signups for subscriptions because they don't want to give Apple the 30%. Yeah. And so use the reader exception. So you got to go to the web and do it. And then you can log into the app with your credentials. Same thing with Netflix. If you remember, they also went through this and they all ended up moving to IEP after the 15%. And so this is exactly what you mentioned, Chris. Now you'll be able to go into Spotify. You can see the different prices. I forget if they offer IEP subscriptions anymore, but you can now do it from the app.
So how does this change
or browser?
How does this change the model for Fortnite Creative? Because I know, do they have a mobile version of Fortnite Creative? I would imagine not.
They do. So to rewind on this one a little bit too. So Fortnite has always, they've got a mobile SKU of Fortnite, right? They had a mobile SKU for iOS and they have a mobile SKU for Android. And then when all the shenanigans were going down, they pulled off. So Project Liberty is when it gets pulled from the App Store. They've always direct distributed an APK on Android, but because they didn't go through the Google Play Store because they didn't want to pay the 30%, there was a ton of install fraud. It was just an absolute nightmare, right? And so that didn't end up really going anywhere anyways. And so now the iOS version will be coming back and it's a full featured version of Fortnite. Like you can play UEFN stuff in the mobile app. It's a really impressive demo of Unreal Engine.
So
yeah,
we're all economists here. We all like competition. We all think this is probably beneficial for the ecosystem. And it sounds like a bunch of people are benefiting, like you mentioned, Spotify and Netflix, even non-gaming people are benefiting. I'm curious, do you think this was a positive play for Epic or even ex ante? Was the expected value of doing all these lawsuits positive for them? Or is this just Tim Sweeney going on a crusade for the people?
Even better, Eric, because we know how much they pay the lawyers in the fucking lawsuit. Because one of the things is that there's an indemnity process where you're always trying to countersue to get your lawyer fees if you win or lose. And so it turns out that Apple paid $80 million for their lawyers over the course of this 3 to 4 year trial. And so I imagine Epic's probably around 50 million. But man, this guy increased mobile GDP.
Do you think
I mean, I
Epic
gotta
specifically is making
hand it to the
50 more
guy.
million more dollars
Well,
for this?
Yes, because first of all, they've sacrificed. I think they actually, Tim really hurt Epic Games by not putting Fortnite on iOS.
Yeah.
If you go back to the original trial documents, iOS and Android were a significant portion of their DAU. And not only that, a significant portion of their revenue. And you need every single user you can get, especially when they went to UFN, because we know there's networking effects when you have UGC. There's all the things we were talking about with copyright.
Well, I mean, it's like Roblox, the vast majority of their players are mobile. And Fortnite or Epic's trying to play a similar playbook with Creative and Fortnite. Phil, you said something there I think we should probably digest more is like mobile GDP just grew. You might look at this and say, it didn't grow. We're just moving around the pieces. It used to be that Apple got 30% of this, and now these guys get 30% of it. But does this seem like an actual growth vector? Do we expect more innovation? Do we expect more growth within the mobile gaming sector because there's no longer this massive, I don't know, you could call it a weight.
Rent seeking. Let's go there. We got rent seeking, baby. This is rent seeking 101. So here are my predictions so far. So I think you're right. There's a transaction. We're shifting money around. Remember, we're shifting money from Apple, which is engaging in non-productive rent-seeking activity, to putting more dollars in the hands of developers. And that moves GDP from Apple to gaming. And if we have more GDP in gaming, we're more likely to see innovation. I think almost all of these gains are going to get, in a sense, bid out, because what's going to happen is that the realized LTV to a developer is now 30% higher. So I was making $100 on a user in revenue to a developer. Now I'm making 130. And so what does that mean? That means that if I bid in terms of UA traffic, I'm not bidding at a $100 LTV. I'm bidding against a $130 LTV. And so if I'm Meta or AppLovin, I'm going to win, and their stocks are already up 4%. This is exactly what's happening.
Yeah. Now,
and so I think we'll see more total gains.
This is not a removal of the 30% Apple store fee. This is just now people can link out to a web store. So
let me throw it back to you guys. What now we have this is competitive pressure. If you're Apple, now you got to figure out how you set the revenue maximizing price, right? Because you're facing real competition. So what did Apple do?
No, I think that's a super interesting point. It's okay. 30% was clearly just like some arbitrary number that they chose that seemed like high enough that it was ridiculous, but low enough that people weren't like, we literally have to shut our doors down. It always was like, why not 35%? Why not 40%? That nobody can say anything. You obviously want to balance. I think what they were pricing before was, if we increase the rate by 1%, does the number of developers decrease and thus revenue decrease by more than 1%? So there's still elasticity there, but now they have a lot. Elasticity is much more elastic than it was before, where it was like, we have no alternative, so we have to pay this 30% fee. Now they have other choices. So elasticity is going to get less elastic.
Want to get more elastic? Aren't people going to be more sensitive?
Yeah. Elasticity is going to be more elastic. So now, for any change in their price, consumers, or I guess video game developers, are going to be, I'm like trying to run through this live here, are going to be more reactive to an increase, and they're going to leave, they're going to lose. So I don't know. You could see the price come down 5%, or is it 15%? I'd be very surprised if we didn't see the price come down. If you're a developer, there's not really any harm in adding the web store. It's like it's not an either or, it's both.
Yes, that.
I
do think there's some very interesting economics about whether or not you choose to remove IEP altogether if you're a developer and just use the web store. And I forget what the rules are, if they're still allowed to mandate both, because that was one of the Apple rules as well, is that are you allowed to have lower prices
on the web store?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see how that. Of course, they cannot do the most favored nation.
So you can just have like ludicrously high IAP prices. So the question is, are you allowed to sell things exclusively through the web store, or do you have to have it on both? But because you can raise the price in the app, just make the price in the app very high. That's like basically the same as not selling it.
Yeah.
Yep, you could do that. That's exactly right. And that's it, Eric. I think that's the economic analysis. You want to set your in-app prices. Like, there's an equilibrium here where there's still an optimal in-app price and there's an optimal web shop price that maximizes revenue, because there's still convenience associated with the in-app price. I think people forget, like, when you hit that web store button, there's still some shenanigans. How fast does the web page load? The UX isn't as good. There's some sign-in issues. But I think you're totally right, Eric. There's going to be some movement of prices that make this make the most amount of sense. And same thing with the discounter. How much do I discount the web store prices to drive the optimal amount of traffic? Now, here's one thing that I think is very interesting. So if you play Monopoly Go right now, and I was asking about this to some colleagues, they were already, in my view, violating this before the ruling. They were violating the entitlement program. So if you go into the sidebar in Monopoly Go, you can go to something called the Tycoon Club, and then you can make purchases there, which I thought was just a clear violation. But I thought what was really interesting about this saga is that when you try to go and make a purchase there, it'll pull up Xsolla, which is one of the web store providers. And in the Xsolla web store page, when you're trying to make a purchase for Monopoly Go, you can pay with Apple Pay. Remember, Apple Pay is just an API that you can use in Uber or really anywhere. You can use it on just the web. You can use Apple Pay anywhere. You can use it on any website. It's just it's just an API you can plug in.
Okay, I want to go into the optimal pricing. So you've got the developer who is now choosing optimal P in-game and optimal P out-game. Let's say that the delta between those is like 15% or 25%. Let's just say it's some number, 15%. Can Apple extract more revenue by reducing the fee that they extract by encouraging people to prefer in-app? It's like, how does that dynamic work? I think there's 3 different prices going on, which is confusing to think about on the spot. But it's okay, if we lower our price, then people care less about moving, so the delta goes down, so more purchases happen. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out with the delta between in-app and out-of-app and the delta between current Apple pricing and the new Apple pricing.
So here's something that was really interesting in the documents too that I haven't had a big chance to absorb is that they hired the Analysis Group, which is a group of economists in California. It's a consulting firm to do an analysis on what the actual value is that Apple adds to the ecosystem. And of course, I would say, I don't know if those results were intellectually honest. I think they got to a number that was greater than 30%.
Wait,
yes.
Apple paid the consulting group to calculate what's our value add to this ecosystem?
Exactly, because the claim is that the 30% was super margins? There was a specific term, super margin, super competitive, super pricing. And so what Apple's basically trying to argue is that basically everyone charges 30%. So it's very interesting. So in the document, what they do is they talk about the fact there's these headline rates and there's the effective rates, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what we talk about in economics all the time, right? You got your marginal, your real rate, and your effective rate. And so what they were saying is Amazon charges 30%. But one of the things Epic pointed out is, 30% is the headline rate for sellers on Amazon. The effective rate is 18% because they're always cutting deals with people. And the other piece that was extremely interesting is that they pointed out this happens on game consoles. Because you remember, like Xbox and PlayStation still charge 30% for MTX if you're making a virtual currency purchase. But it turns out a lot of people got some deals going on in the back that we don't know about, getting that 30% down. So that 30% might be a headline number, but it's not a marginal rate. It's not the effective rate, excuse me.
This will be good for Roblox too, because there's almost like a compounding effect. When they get a better deal, so do their developers, and they've got n number of developers. So I bet Roblox is feeling pretty good right now.
Yeah, I think the thing I've always been confused about Roblox is I think they like push. It's an 80% marginal tax, and if you're listening at home, I'm sure you just shit the bed. They provide a lot of value for that 80%, but 30 percentage points of that was platform fees. Mm-hmm. The thing I always throw shade about them at is that a lot of their money comes from fucking gift cards. Gift cards are huge for Roblox. I guess you still have to pay the 30% to the. Actually, don't think you have to pay 30% to the retailers on the gift cards. I think those are pretty much free.
It's a fee. It's
your small fee.
I want to say it's in the teens, maybe 20, but I forgot what.
So here's a question, right? This is a huge win for the gaming ecosystem as a whole, or like us mobile gaming. How come this didn't happen earlier? How come we needed one person like Tim to like really champion this? This seems like a collective action problem where like the game developers could form a collective, some kind of like industry group and collectively fund some kind of lawsuit against Apple. Yeah, how come that didn't happen? And
app is of Russia, like in terms of the economics, like, you know, $1
trillion company. Yep. I think, Eric, you're exactly right on an expected value function, is especially if it was 80 million in costs in terms of legal fees. First of all, for Apple, that's nothing. Now let's say it's 80 million for Epic, which I think is too high. I don't think they paid as much for their lawyers. But are you kidding me? Fortnite makes billion, like what? I forget what the number is, but let's say $1-2 billion a year, right? And so you got to compound that over time. And so 50 million for a lawyer, I think you could win on expected value. But to your point, Eric, they actually did do this. So in Europe, they formed a commission. Tim and Spotify and a bunch of other people have been pissed about this shit forever. Of course, none of the game developers joined. And it's because they don't want to piss off Apple. Because remember, Apple still controls featuring. So whether or not your game appears on the App Store, that drives a bunch of free organic traffic.
Yeah.
And they've been trying to like basically bring back control to the App Store that they previously had. Featuring isn't as powerful as it used to be, but everyone's really afraid to speak out against Apple. And Apple is extremely vindictive if you do shit like this.
So it's funny because this is, I think, better for competition. But because there's no alternative, doesn't Apple have, I guess, like, what economic principle did Apple violate by doing this? And was there anything like, I'm assuming where it breaks down is you cannot sell an alternative app store on the Apple App Store. So they're literally saying, no, you're not allowed to do that here. They're almost making laws as opposed to in a perfectly competitive market, a new app store would come out and undercut them and say, hey, there's 0 fees or 5% fees. But Apple was like almost like using virtual warfare in order to create these rules and laws that are not competitive, not really capitalistic. So I guess I answered my own question.
Yeah. Total rent-seeking behavior. Yeah, no app stores within app stores. And the way, by the way, Google sometimes would be like, oh, Google Android open. First of all, Google still prevents app stores within app stores. And then you have to do side loading with APKs. You still get scare screens if you do side loading with APKs. The problem is without a sanctioned trusted way to get apps, it becomes like the early internet, right? Am I downloading porn? Am I downloading a virus? You know, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And Apple extracted the monopoly by tying, right? This is where like all the regulators go wild, tying. But they tied Android or the parts of the Android operating system to Google Play services. So if you want some versions of Android, you got to make sure you have all the Google Play services, which means the Google Play Store, which means you're going to go side loading to get the store. This is how they counteracted Samsung, right? Because Samsung was trying to build their own store and they still have it, which is where Fortnite was, by the way. Fortnite was in the Samsung store on Android.
About the legal side of things, that's something that I have no idea, never been a part of anything.
I really want to get into antitrust economics. I think it's really interesting. I'm surprised, Eric, you didn't do more. Like, you had fucking Richard Posner over at
were all
Chicago.
just fucking math. It was all just solid Lagrangians. I don't remember shit.
I didn't
know.
I thought you had Levitt.
There's
Levitt for
triple the
crying.
demand as the amount of supply for that class.
I mean,
damn.
I just want to be an expert witness. That's my goal in life, is to become an expert witness.
No, you make good money doing that.
Really?
Yes, you can make good money.
Not if it's like an employment lawsuit or something like, oh, this person owes me.
Also, you have to do a bunch of
$30,000
intellectually
because I
dishonest
broke my
shit,
foot.
like Phil was talking about, where you just have to glaze your defending.
It's like didn't they find that there's basically if you were to hire the same consultant for, if you're on the, what is it,
Defendant.
the plaintiff side and
I don't know.
what are the two sides in a civil lawsuit?
Plaintiff and defendant.
Yeah, if you do the plaintiff side versus the defendant side, the same consultant is going to give you completely different results. It makes sense.
We have the analysis group. Man, it takes some real soul searching to find out how Apple is providing more than 30% value to the ecosystem.
So that's topic number one.
So anyways, let's see how this all plays out. There's a bunch of competitors. I think the economics here is super interesting.
Yeah.
I think the only other thing is when you go to the web, remember, there have been restrictions on what you can offer as an IEP as well, right? And they started to remove some of these restrictions. But if you remember a while back, there were only so many SKUs you could have, right? Which is why virtual currency exists, right? Is that every time you wanted to make a SKU, or anytime you want to make a purchase, having it be an in-app purchase with a lot of friction. This is what people get wrong about why virtual currency exists, right? So if you play a mobile game, you might be spending, let's say you might spend 100 currency 100 times in a single day. And making that an in-app purchase for real-world money is an extremely laborious and high transaction cost system. And not only that, it's literally transaction cost. Because remember, there's a fixed fee on credit card processing, which is 10 cents, which means that you're making negative money every time someone would make a 10-cent hard currency purchase or sub 10-cent hard currency purchase. And so they would not only limit the number of SKUs, but remember, they also limited the price for a really long time. You could only have the $100 SKU. Now they've changed some of this where you have more SKUs and you can raise the price. But I still think there's a lot you can do on the web that it's free, man. It's the web. You can do whatever the fuck you want. that you couldn't do under Apple's rules, which I think is also going to be an interesting piece of innovation.
Oh my gosh. Last night I dropped a dart on my foot last night and it was hurting all night. I didn't sleep well, so I'm not as up and excited
Were
as
you at
I
like a
should be.
bar playing darts?
Emergency episode. No, I have it in my basement, and I was pulling the dart and
They're like
dropped
real
one
sharp
on my
darts, not
foot
like
and
the-
like immediately started bleeding. Yeah, they're like 24 grams. Anyway, so now allow me to introduce Game Economist cast episode number 40, the big 4-0. We're emergency topic, epic, the Apple, amazing analysis by our lovely Phil here, who is our legal consultant. But before we get to Apple and our topics, which involve Joost van Durnen, piece about how do we grow from here with our budgets exploding. It seems every 5 years the budget more than doubles for producing a AAA game. But before we get to our fun topics, let's chat about what we have been playing.
Got a selection of good things on sale, stranger.
Chris, you're going to put me on a job with that post. That was awesome, man.
The big 4-0.
It just came to me. It just came to me. What can I?
Dude, I'll just sit back and relax now. This is great. Is this what it's like
well,
to be you
dude,
guys?
that's-
Just
I
let
mean,
it happen?
I have to do that. Yesterday I had my 12th economic forum. I started this thing where I like go in front of the community and I talk about the economics in Star Atlas. I go through the data, go through,
Well-
of prices, stuff like that. So I'm used to it.
One
What?
thing we didn't add, this is game changing for crypto.
Why?
If you're a crypto game, you can now link out to
Dude,
webstores.
crypto doesn't pay attention to any of these fucking rules.
That's true. Gabe Leiden does. Gabe Leiden was talking about this, and I think he's exactly right. This is a boon for crypto because now you can go off on the web store and offer crypto payments that you were never able to do IEP. And so I think this is going to be
That's an
huge for
interesting
crypto
point.
games.
Actually, that's a really good point. One of the reasons we hesitated to produce an app was because it was very ambiguous. Can you pay for this in crypto? Does the crypto get charged at 30%? And then that's a big liability because you've got this asset that's constantly fluctuating. 30% tomorrow might be 50%, or sorry, 30% yesterday might be 50% tomorrow, and vice versa. But
So one crystal clear example of this is Sorare. So if you remember Sorare, Web3 NFT fantasy footballer platform, incredible company, incredible founder, love them to pieces, one of the best implementations of Web3. And so the way they chose to integrate payment into the mobile app for Sorare is that you still had the marketplace, but when you were going to purchase something, they would just add 30% to whatever the price was on the peer-to-peer marketplace. So if you want the privilege of buying something on mobile, you would add that 30%. And so now what they can do is they could remove IAP and they could just say, go to the web store to make the purchase.
how does peer-to-peer trade work though? Or how did it work? If you wanted to buy something off a market, because that's like the whole Web3 thing is people are trading back and forth. Do you have to pay on the fee to Apple? Let's say you extract a 10% fee. Are you paying Apple 3% of that fee, 3 percentage points of that fee? Or are you paying them like 30% on every single fucking trade? Because that seems insane.
30% on every single trade.
I don't even understand. Yeah, so that's basically broken.
Because remember, it's an IAP. If you're making a trade, like a trade is still a purchase, so you're making IAP. Now, what you could have always done is you can trade things off platform, or you could just trade things for zero in the platform and do an
What
off
if it's
payment,
like an NFT for NFT trade?
off payment.
Yeah, but how do you charge?
You can
30%?
still there's no money involved. You don't charge 30% on that. There's no IEP involved.
Okay, so if they
Remember, it's
already
only-
have
it's only when
currency
you're
in their
making a
account,
purchase
there's
of a good or
IEP.
Okay,
service.
but
You
so
have to add currency. That's where the tax is paid.
Correct. Just as we were talking about with the dual linking, and if you buy something in Call of Duty Warzone desktop, it'll be in the mobile app.
This is actually really great for us. We've always avoided a Star Atlas app because it was like, just keep people on the web page. It's so much easier. But because that was the big thing is, okay, when they log into their account and let's say they've got a bunch of Atlas, do we have to follow any regulations and rules? And I think with the old framework, it was like actually not allowed in the old system for us to allow people to import their Atlas into their account once they download the app. So that's interesting.
Yep. And we'll talk about this on what we've been playing because there's some peer-to-peer market stuff we should talk about.
Speaking of legal issues, I've been playing Tetris. I'll circle back to that. But I was playing the Tetris effect. It's just Tetris, but there's like amazing, like kind of this like audio visual stuff happening there's like different environments with like different sound effects and the music synchronized to how you play. And if you clear 4 lines at once, the whole screen will go rainbow and make a bunch of sound effects and stuff. It was pretty good. But the thing that's really interesting to me about Tetris is that the core game is basically unchanged. Like this thing, like when it was created, was basically like the final form. Like it's been decades, and all the iterations have been super minor. And anytime someone tries a dramatic design innovation, like 3D Tetris, what if there was 3 dominoes and 5 dominoes instead of just like 4 dominoes? They all fail. And so this game knew that, and they were just like, look, the Tetris is Tetris. We're going to keep Tetris, the core the same, and just add stuff around the audio, the visual, the experience, the progression. But Tetris has also done a very good job of clamping down on clones. Like we were talking last time about how game mechanics are not copyrightable. And I did this whole deep dive onto what exactly is Tetris protecting, because they seem to be able to enforce the copyright. I won't get into it here. Check out my article if you're interested, but
Link in the show notes.
successful at protecting the game Tetris, or Tetris-like games, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, it is. Whereas other games, there's this Pokemon Palworld lawsuit happening, and I think Pokemon's gonna lose. I hope they lose. And like most game clones are successful at cloning.
So did Tetris? I remember in that article you specified like copyright versus what was it?
Yeah,
It was
so
copyright law
basically there's
versus
quick version.
patents.
So there's 3 main categories of intellectual property protection here:
Come on.
trademark, patent, and copyright. So trademark is just like your brand name. So like calling your game Tetris, you can't call it Tetris. So that's not a big deal here. You could just call it Block Drop. The second issue is patents. So patents are like technological innovations, right? Think of like a patent. And Tetris does have patents, but this game is not being protected by patent. It's being protected by copyright. So copyright is the creator's right to copy and reproduce and sell the work, and for other people to not copy it. And then, but it gets into this weird thing where there's a distinction between the idea and the expression of the idea. For example, battle royale game where the bunch of people shoot each other and last one standing wins, right? That's an idea, but there's multiple expressions. You got PUBG and Warzone and Apex and all that. And so different expressions of the same, a particular expression is copyrighted, but the idea itself is not. And so most games are fine because the game mechanic is just the idea, and you can express it in many different ways, and those are distinct enough to be considered a different expressions, different copyright. But Tetris is so simple, so abstract, and also I think just it's such a pop culture phenomenon that when people think Tetris is a very specific game they're thinking of, that it seems like every expression of the idea is so close to Tetris that they get copyrighted and sued and taken down. And yeah, so basically, it's licensed. It's by licensed from the Tetris company. Pretty much every Tetris game is licensed by the Tetris.
Oh,
company.
this is
Tetris 39.
That's
Tetris
interesting. That's funny.
Yeah,
Is
but if
that
it's got
fair?
Tetris in the name, they licensed it from. If it's got the Tetris trademark, they licensed it.
Interesting.
Lawyer
But-
Cast episode 40.
Seriously.
Yeah, none of us are lawyers, so we're all just like.
Where's
armchair
Richard
lawyers
Posner?
here reading some Wikipedia article.
I mean-
well, there's been a lot of mischief of economists in the
But
line.
so one weird thing is in the Pokemon Palword lawsuit, it's not a copyright lawsuit. It's not a trademark lawsuit. It's a patent lawsuit. And Pokemon claims to have patented technology of throwing a ball and catching a Pokemon, or a combat character is how they phrase it, and that gets used in combat.
And the patent is hilarious. They like show the monster. They show the ball trying to hit the monster. It's really funny.
Does it have to be a ball? Can it be like
Spear
stick
ball.
or something, or is it
Spherical object.
spherical? They should have made it. They should have made it like a box world. It should have been a square, and you just throw the square. But
Maybe you could throw a loot box, right?
It's just weird to me that's a patent. Like, that doesn't seem like a technological innovation.
the thing that I've realized about law, like the more I hear about law, the more I realize that it's just a bunch of everything. It's quite literally like everything is a very specific case. And the people that were involved with those cases are the reason that law came about or that the ruling held. So like with this judge, if it was any other judge, it would have happened a completely different way with the Epic v. Apple. With Palworld, depending on how it's litigated, it's crazy. And it goes all the way up to the federal level, obviously, but it really is just all time and a place. It's not as mathematical and logical as at least my interpretation is that the law is not as mathematical as we would like it to be. Where like, oh, A plus A is equal to 2A, and it's always that way. Sometimes A plus A is equal to like A plus B. It's not as methodical as I think we
You hear about
would
how
like
in,
to
I
think
think it was
that
in
it
like
is.
Indiana, they tried to pass a bill saying that pi was equal to 3.
No, I didn't see. That is literally 2 and 2
Sacrilege.
makes 5. 2 and
Anyway,
2
that's
makes
my
5.
bit.
That is okay. Phil, have you been playing anything interesting?
So if you remember, there's this game called Delta Force, which is an old IP that was created in America and Tencent bought. And so they decided to make a game called Delta Force, which is basically just a ripoff of Battlefield. And I say this as someone who worked on Battlefield. They were stealing everything from Battlefield 2042. We're talking UI elements, operate, just everything. And they basically slapped on a bunch of Call of Duty monetization on top of that. So they just launched their mobile version in globally outside of China. So it was already in China. And the thing that I found really unique is that they brought the peer-to-peer marketplace into this game so you can buy and sell gun skins. And the other thing that's been happening very quietly is that Rainbow Six Siege from Ubisoft also introduced a peer-to-peer marketplace. And so now you've got CSGO, you've got Rainbow Six Siege, and you've got Delta Force all having peer-to-peer marketplaces. And it's been this subtle trend. And I'm really curious to see if we'll see Apex Legends go in this direction, because EA already has all the tech, right? They already have all the auction house tech from FIFA and FIFA Ultimate Team, which also has an auction place. And like we kept going back and talking about Web3. And to me, the Web3 revolution is really about marketplaces. Whether or not blockchain is involved, to me, is secondary. It's about marketplaces because it becomes a plank of engagement. Playing the market is really important.
You don't need a blockchain to do that, though. That's the thing that's always frustrated me with that. It's like Web3, it's just like open economy. You've doing that for years.
Now, technically, though, the money's still trapped in the system, right? In the sense that you can't cash out. This is what all the third-party controversy is about with CSGO, is that you can find people to cash out off platform and then you do the trade in game.
Fair.
But I think this becomes an engagement plank. And again, it's really controlled. Like everyone who does trade really controls it. Talk about all the problems with trade, particularly in digital economies, right? Because if you continue to make more and more assets, then your supply curve is going to shift outward, which means equilibrium price is going to drop because there's no deterioration method. So how do I reduce circulating supply? What's the answer for that in a cosmetic economy? First of all, I'm still worried about that. But I think what I've come a little bit more around to is just the idea that fashion has like these cyclical trends. And I don't think in cosmetic economies, we've really figured out how we can control the cyclical trends other than just like making more content. But I really thought a lot of cosmetic economies would tend towards degradation over the long run because of people just purchasing cosmetic items. And then once you have the best cosmetic item, once I have a Prada bag, what could be better than a Prada bag?
A vintage Prada bag.
What I really...
Another Prada bag.
You got to match your whole outfit, yeah.
But seriously, I actually really like this point, Phil. Like, this is something that I've come to realize, like, in the Web3 realm. It's like, something doesn't need to have a high price forever. It needs to have a high price in a moment in time. Like, prices are dynamic. They're temporal. They're not this thing that, like, your in-game shoes are not the US dollar. It does not have to have stable value over time. And obviously, with a cryptocurrency, you would like it to be a little bit more stable, especially if it is supposed to be time resistant. But especially with NFTs, items like that, it's like prices fluctuate. And if something becomes worthless, I just don't get this obsession with iron ore in a RPG needing to have this forever value that's incredible. Obviously, you can balance it with sinks, but yeah, I like that point.
And yeah, I don't think we've really mastered the economics of fashion and kind of these cyclical trends and really cracking the code on this. People talk about function over form all the time, but it's not like I see people going to Goodwill and spending $3 on a t-shirt, right? We still spend hundreds of dollars because what do cosmetics do? They signal things, right? It's embedded in the clothes that you wear. Like when you were talking about that Prada bag, that says something, it communicates something. And I don't think we've figured out how to really master that communication and subject it to our evil monetization will.
I think that's the powerful thing about an open market is that at least for a specific set of quantity or a specific quantity, it gives you the equilibrium price. And that's a really powerful thing. I don't think we figured out how to wield that yet, but I know the market value of everything we sell.
I agree. The problem is that we still control supply, which means we still control price in a sense.
Yeah. Though if you're a crypto person and you have a cryptocurrency, you know that supply actually has nothing to do with price. That's different. I can go on my soapbox later.
What's the saying? The market can stay irrational rather than you can stay liquid.
No,
So you want to go ahead and say it?
Yeah, I think it's the market can stay irrational for longer than you can
solvent.
stay. It's either liquid or solvent. I can't remember what.
Solvent, yeah.
Solvent.
I'll edit that in so it seems really smooth.
I have a joke. I think I've told you guys, like, I could slash the supply of Atlas tomorrow and the price would not bump. It wouldn't change at all. I couldn't, but one. Anyway, that's interesting. So I'm curious if Ubisoft was planning on, because they were like super loud about Web3 for a while.
Remember Quartz? Rainbow Six Siege, a little serial code you would have in a cosmetic?
So was that like their whole thing? They were like, we're going to introduce markets into Rainbow Sage 6, or were there more, there were unnamed projects that ended up being canceled?
So remember, they did actually launch an NFT game recently with a developer, and they had another one in development, but Quartz ended up getting shuttered. And yeah, by the way, Rainbow Six Siege Marketplace is not blockchain powered. So the thing I'll point out. I wonder if they're doing something on the back end, but it's so weird to me that Ubisoft is the most progressive.
Complexity. Yeah. They're like hurting for money, so they're probably more willing to take risks.
Yep.
Didn't they just lay off 20,000 people or something crazy?
Oh, it's not. There's a whole lot we could talk about with Ubisoft. Let's talk about illegal. They sold the IP of the company to a holding company that they also own that's privately held. They sold Rainbow Six Siege, Far Cry, and a bunch of their popular IP to this privately held company. So they basically just robbed shareholders because they're not getting payout. Very different side. We're getting back into the legal issue, but
they're just, I was going to say, that's just like corporate financing. How do we avoid having to pay fees and penalties and tax when we inevitably go bankrupt?
What have you been playing, Chris?
I've been playing. So I actually, in the last week, my wife had a conference in Colorado, so I just went to Colorado and didn't have a lot of time to play video games. But yeah, I've been playing. Before that, I was playing a bunch of platformers. So I busted out the Limbo and then the Limbo's follow-up. I forget what it's called. I didn't even finish Limbo. Do you guys know that game?
Spooky.
Yes, it's the black and white one, right?
Yeah, Inside Out.
Yeah, he's like running through this like the scene with the robot, the lights.
Yeah, so I've been playing like some more, I don't know what you would call that, like atmospheric platformers or something like that, puzzle games. Also, Celeste, Eric's favorite game. Celeste is, I don't actually like it that much. I got to be honest with you, but I'll get into that. Inside was really cool. I played Inside first, and then I played the prequel. The game that came out before Inside was called Limbo. This like dark, creepy vibe. You're like, it's like black and white with a lot of fog, and you're like, it's a puzzle platformer. Inside, the mechanics are greatly improved from the first one, so it was really weird to go back to the old clunky version, and I'm like missing jumps because the controls suck. But the game was really interesting. It's like a 5 to 6 hour experience. I really like those types of games sometimes where I know, okay, I can just play this for a couple hours and it's going to be over. One of my favorite gaming experiences ever was playing Journey from start to no, Turmeric, that's a 20-hour experience. That's a high quality 20-hour premium experience. But like Journey, I think it's like a 2-3 hour game. I played it from start to finish in one sitting with some buddies sitting around watching. But anyway, Inside was very similar type of experience, but just like really creepy. I'm not a big creepy fan of games, but yeah, there's nothing really interesting to talk about in terms of the economics. You pay $15 to play this game for 4 hours, 5 hours. I do think it's interesting how much higher the dollar per hour played is for these like short games, because you could still get away with charging $30 for one of these like 6 hour experiences. Versus you try and tell somebody you're going to charge $100 for GTA 6, which they're going to play for 1,000 hours, and they're like, how fucking dare you? I'm not paying that much money. I actually think, and we might talk about this when we talk about Joost Drunen's piece, but it's like, are these cheaper games that you charge 15, 20, $30 for that cost you $1 million to develop a better bang for your buck than the game that costs $500 million to develop? But yeah, platformers, just short, fun stuff that I can just dive into. I haven't been playing much other than Monster Hunter in terms of like lifestyle games. And I fell off the Monster Hunter. I'm done with Wilds. They had an update come out. I logged in. I didn't give a fuck about it because it's like the same game. Like they just revamped a few bosses and they're harder now and it's okay.
Wait, tell me about Celeste. What's your beef with Celeste?
Celeste? So I like games where I can get into a flow state, and Celeste, it's like every scene is a new challenge that I have to figure out. And it's probably going to be controversial. I think that there are parts of Celeste that if there's a part of the scene that is off camera, it is almost impossible to do it on the first try. I'm sure that there are crazy maniacs out there like Eric who can do it on the first try, but it's kind of, there are scenes in Dark Souls where you would not know that you're about to get backstabbed by an enemy because it's just impossible to know. It's kind of like this.
But that didn't stop you from playing Dark Souls.
There's no way you could have prepared. No, I know, but it's also not every fucking scene in Dark Souls. It's 2 or 3 of those throughout the entire game versus in Celeste, it's okay. I can plan out how I'm going to solve the scene in terms of jumping and stuff, but every scene takes me, I would say within each chapter, there are probably five or 6 scenes that take me over 100 tries each.
You gotta just turn up the assist mode, slow down the speed and stuff. Yeah, there's like assist mode where you can slow it down, you can have infinite grip time, there's other easy mode options, but it's very calibratable, which is nice.
No, I'm not gonna make it easy on myself. And I plan on beating it. But it's a slow burn, and I'm just like, it was a game that I thought I was gonna like a lot more than I am.
You're definitely right that
We'll
it's
see
not
what
a
playthrough number 2 is like.
yeah, you have to be willing to bang your head against the same wall like 100 times. That's part of the
Yeah.
point, right? It's
Yeah.
like you're trying to climb this mountain and like it's a struggle and like you're like, why am I even doing this halfway through? You're like, man, what's the point of trying to overcome this difficult challenge? There's no extrinsic reason why I'm climbing this mountain.
Yeah, so I would lose 100 times in a row in Celeste, or okay, let's say 20, 25, 30 times in a row in Celeste, and I would just go play Inside because it's still a puzzle game, still scratches that itch, but it's much, much easier. But without further ado, talking about costs of games, and I'm sure Celeste costs probably like $1 million to make. Should we jump into Joost van Druinen's latest blog post, Gaming's $1 billion Gamble? The piece is not, I wouldn't say, one that has a strong thesis. It's more a bunch of observations about some of the challenges facing gaming. How do we come out of this? What are some of the things that we should keep in mind? Obviously, he's been pretty vocal about the fact that tariffs could have a pretty significant impact on the gaming industry. I think it's interesting, like 30 years later, we're probably much better insulated to fight off increased costs of imports than we were 30 years ago because of the digitization. So he talks a little bit about that. One of the really like stark visualizations that I like is this one. He shared this on LinkedIn as well, but it's just like looking at, on a roughly 4-year time scale, the increase in cost of producing AAA games. This is for a selected number of games, but you can see every 4 years we almost double the cost of producing a AAA game. Now, a lot of this is just due to the fact that we have more pixels we have more bytes in our game. They're bigger, they're badder. But it's interesting because you think, oh, we've got all this technological growth. Why are we not shouldn't this be linear? Shouldn't our productive capabilities grow linearly with the complexity of the space? Like AI, shouldn't AI technically lower these costs? And he makes an argument that's actually not necessarily going to be the case. I forget what he says specifically.
These are all real numbers too. He adjusted for inflation, so
Yeah,
he checks an econ box for us.
Yeah, this is like real numbers. Oh, it's right here. The primary consequence of technological advancement has not been innovation in game mechanics, but rather escalating production demands, particularly in art, sound, and network infrastructure. Development costs are rising exponentially, and the audience's willingness to pay remains relatively fixed. The demands have increased, but our ability to produce the supply has not increased at the same exponential rate that the demand has. So the expectations for quality of graphics is exponentially higher than it was 20 years ago, but our ability to produce content has not increased exponentially, which I think is interesting. And maybe one bull case for gaming is that our costs will go down from AI, but I don't think that's a growth vector. That's just like costs going down. Yeah, he does a little bit more chatting about the space, the issues with costs, and then can AI save the day? And this is where it gets into an interesting just chart obstacles game publishers face or expect when adopting generative AI. So I don't know.
I hate this argument. I hear it all the time. Costs are rising, costs are rising, costs are rising. This is unsustainable. First of all, it absolutely is sustainable because if it wasn't sustainable, costs wouldn't rise. The reason costs keep going up is because the game industry has increased demand for our goods and services, and our ability to scale that budget or amortize it over a wider player base has increased. So of course budgets are going to go up. If the demand for gaming did not rise, budgets would not increase. What he doesn't show here is the correlation between the increase in budgets and the increase in demand for gaming, which has to be correlated, right? Or what he's arguing is that margins in the industry are decreasing. There's no evidence for that. And then this argument that game prices have not changed is also a false argument, because we're forgetting that all the different ways we price discriminate. We have special editions, which are $100, $200, $300. And not only that, when you have an MTX model, it might be theoretically possible that you want the price lower to be than it might otherwise be without MTX, because you want to get that post-back LTV, right? So I've never really understood this argument about cost that people
So
are
you're just
always
saying,
doing.
like, yeah, margin has gone up, but marginal benefit has met marginal cost.
Of course,
Yeah.
that also is true.
Here, I agree with Philip. Everything he said.
I like him to pieces. I actually think
Said he
anyone who has a serious contribution to the conversation of gaming is a winner in my book. I do disagree with a lot of his theories, though. They're un-econ. He's not a, what is the name? Ad econ? What's the economic
Homo
man again?
rationalis or something? Homo
He's not
economist.
an econ.
'Cause
Homo economicus.
there's one point he made which I thought was interesting, which basically his claim is that this trend towards a small number of giant blockbusters is actually the rational decision to be making when the media landscape is saturated. He cites that Blockbuster book, which I haven't heard of. Apparently the same trend happened in movies and music and like other media industries. And yeah, I was curious about that because we're definitely seeing this pattern, right? Like Activision's cutting all their small games. They're basically just the COD company now. And other Ubisoft cutting a lot of their small games. And my initial reaction was like, oh, like AI is going to allow more small bets. You can make a lot of small games more quickly, and maybe that'll be the direction the industry moves in. But he makes the opposite argument.
Yeah, I think we should probably plot the cost of the games to produce the games along with the revenue that those games are generating. Because yeah, like we've seen, what have we seen every 10 years? What's like the current growth rate of the gaming industry up until obviously 23? It was like what, 10% a year, 20% a year? It was something insane. We were seeing like ridiculous growth. I don't know if you would get the same if you were to plot the growth in costs over the growth in revenue. I don't know what it looks like, but I think that's a really important one. And I'm guessing you're right, Phil. Those two curves would line up. Yes,
we can just look
marginal
at
costs going up.
margins. We can look at margins, right? Because margins is the output of this minus this. And so for his argument to be valid, you have to assume that margins are
would have to
declining.
be shrinking, which I doubt is true. Do you know what margins look like for these big companies?
Like an EA?
Yeah.
Obviously it changes based on what projects in the pipeline, cancellations, yada. But you're looking like last quarter, EA reported a net profit margin of 15%. Obviously, that's one sample for one company at a point in time, but just as a taste test.
Isn't 30% like considered really good for tech? So I'd be surprised if we were at 50. You said 60%, right?
Yeah, that's net margin. If you look at the gross margin, it's closer to 70-75%.
Jesus. Yeah, I was thinking of net margin, but so I agree. I agree with that. I do think that there is something to be said for the cost of games perhaps being higher than is there some gain to be had by creating a cheaper to produce game? Could you get the same revenue? Because a lot of the growth is due to the player base growing and people just spending more of their income on games. It's not necessarily that people are like spending more because it's better, if that makes sense. So it's not like people are spending $100 instead of $50 because the game is 2 times as pretty to look at. So is there an argument to be made that maybe there's some sort of value to be extracted from this market if you were able to create a game at a lower cost, but kind of perform the same way that a triple A would? So I'm thinking of games like what's that new game called?
Schedule 1?
Claire Obscure Expedition 33. Like, it's double, probably going to produce, I'd imagine on a game like that, you're going to see a much better margin than you would on average. If you were to repeat this process over and over and over again, create 1,000 of these, and then one of them's a hit, I bet your average margin would be better there than if you were to try to create a AAA game. Now, this is like pure theory speculation on my part, but I just have to imagine that the margin is better on a cheaper game to produce because you still have this hit thing. Is a AAA game going to make that much more than a AA game in Claire Obscura's Expedition 33's case? So I guess my point is I think there's something to be said for the pie has grown. How much of that can you extract while keeping costs down? The marginal cost increasing over time and the revenue growing over time, these are codependent. I don't think it's fair to necessarily say that because I'm spending more,
I think the idea is that
more money.
the revenue distribution is super long tail, right? And like a small number of giant blockbusters are out there. And the idea is that if you funnel more resources into something, it's more likely to be a blockbuster and more likely to be that superstar that is a unicorn game. So everyone's competing to make the next unicorn, and they all believe
Is it
that
though?
throwing more resources at it will make it more likely to be a unicorn.
What I may buy coming out of this that I think is a stronger thesis here is that the risk profile has increased. Like the rewards have increased, but the risk has increased. Right?
Yeah.
Budgets are rising, and the expected value may stay flat over time, but we can see all the
I wonder
variance
if that's still
increasing
true in a
underneath
high
that.
interest rate environment. Like with the low interest rate environment, you are way more likely to take risks.
It's a very interesting point, Eric.
So in a low interest rate
Wait, can
environment,
you
you're
repeat
more
that?
likely to take risks because taking on a ton of debt is less costly. Whereas in a high interest rate environment, which we're in currently in relative to the last decade, taking on that debt is riskier, and so maybe you'd be less willing to take these big gambles that we've been seeing for the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would say there's no reason for me to believe that we have not seen riskiness in the market. It seems we got all these like VCs
Well, are they
handing
still?
out.
Haven't they pulled back basically in the last 2 years?
They pulled back, but I guess Q1 2025 we saw an increase. But also like
Relative to what though? Last quarter when it was the lowest of the last 5 years? It's rough out there, man.
the Convoy put out a report.
It was up quarter over quarter, but the thing is like the pandemic just fucks up all these numbers.
Yeah, do you think the pandemic front loaded a lot of demand for video games and people there's almost like a hangover effect where like they spent all their money on video games because they had nothing to spend it on and now they're like pulling back?
I wouldn't call it a hangover effect. I would just call it people are spending a lot of times on games because their opportunity cost was much lower during the pandemic. You're trapped inside a house. You can't go out. You can't meet with friends. And now your opportunity costs are back on the table. So you reorder your menu and gaming's lower on your menu now. And so it's going to capture less of a share of revenue. I would say the thing I feel like has been understudied from the pandemic is how we had such shitty retention numbers. Don't think about retention as a game. Think about it at a macro level. What is our like year one retention in gaming for all the marginal people we introduced to gaming during the pandemic? This to me is a blow to the entertainment hypothesis that I think Matthew Ball really built his career on, or it made me pay attention to Matthew before kind of the metaverse stuff, is that we're supposed to win because we're the most engrossing form of entertainment. We have dynamicism that no one else can have, right? It's not omnidirectional, it's bidirectional entertainment that no one else can have. And I think that vision is under serious threat.
Yeah, I guess the fact that people were so quick to substitute in and then substitute out of games suggests that it's not like these activation barrier frictions anymore. It's people understand what games are offering and they will play them when they want to and stop playing them when they don't want to. And it's not like this, I don't know, you gotta convert them and they're permanently sticky.
So basically, you guys are of the opinion that, and I'm just trying to synthesize here, AI should technically not have any impact on this whatsoever because
I don't
marginal
believe
costs
that,
are just.
but I think AI is going to benefit smaller studios. Ones who, if you go down to that AI risks list, right, those are all things that a small studio, especially one with a bunch of new people, like cares a lot less about. IP risk, no. Like security, and a bunch of these, yeah, like potential bias and offensive output, take more risk. Employee know-how, just hire people who know how to use it. Pushback from customers, if you don't have an established customer base, you don't have to worry about your reputation with them. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess like my question is, so I don't think that AI is going to revolutionize gaming, especially in the monetization front. And that's mostly because it's not going to be a growth vector, I don't think. In terms of cost reduction, I don't think it's actually going to reduce costs. That's just going to
the
produce
same
more.
game could
I think
be
we're just going to
produced
produce, it's not.
But what ends up happening is we produce bigger games.
Elasticity effect.
But I think it's to Phil's point earlier, I don't think it's a misnomer to say costs aren't going down. It's the same game can be produced cheaper, and that is a cost reduction.
Sure. Okay, but that's not a reason for, that's not like a
I think we'll
growth.
see more games being made. I think especially like lower scale games. Yeah.
Yeah. Supply increases, right? Because everyone's productivity just went up. And I think you got to solve for equilibrium here.
Yeah. It's possible that the demand is unaffected, and so the net pie is
does
unaffected, and so.
That's what I'm saying. Like, yeah,
Correct.
we might have more content out there, but that's actually just going to make it worse for everybody on average because we've got the same players. Is AI going to make games that are more attractive to players and players are going to spend more time and more money? I don't.
I agree
so.
with you. Yeah.
I don't know. To me, that's the question: is this evolution? Is this innovation going to increase the interest or the consumption of this good? I don't think so. I don't really see it's like purely on the supply side.
But see if it's on the supply side. So let's take an example, right? So we got this company out in Finland called Cosmic Lounge. And so they're trying to build like an AI focused match 3 engine. And so the idea is I can make a lot more levels than I could ever make. And so one of the biggest churn points in match is when you get to the end of the level curve, right? There are no more levels to experience. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of tricks. You can level loop people back to the first level. But the biggest churn point in almost all games is end of content. So now we're going to be able to have more content, which means less churn. Like that to me is unilaterally good. That's GDP enhancing. Our PPF curve has moved out. We're sitting on a higher indifference curve. Everyone's going to be better off. I would say from an equilibrium perspective, though, I think all those gains are going to get bid away in the long run. That I would agree with, but it still moves us to a new part of the PPF curve where we're larger than we otherwise would be.
It's like a one-time shift, which is totally fair. I think that's totally fine. I am curious. So end of content, does this make running live service games easier? What part of AI?
Yeah, the Gen AI works great when you got a large, stable training set, right? And just need to produce more content of this type.
Yeah. I'm curious if the marginal value to the consumer goes down, though, if it's AI generated. It's just a variation of content that already exists.
What I would argue, though, and I was pulling this graph, it was someone from Convoy reported this. It's the share of venture capital that is going to AI right now. Overall in tech is around 70%. The share of investment in gaming VC that is AI related is only 13%, and it's been flat for basically the last 3 years. And so if we think about like games as a supply chain, we like to say that games are where like art meets science. And so that being the case, there's only a certain part of the supply chain that AI can optimize, because part of it is things that AI can't optimize. Like a lot of the design stuff and how a lot of these really complex systems fit together is a design task that I think AI is uniquely unable to take on at this moment. And so what I would argue is, yeah, you can triple the amount of cosmetics that you can make. When we think about things like systems design and building all this architecture, like that is something a game designer does.
Yep.
And that's the art piece that I think is going to be much more challenging for AI to be able to add to the supply chain. So I still think you're going to get ramming. You're going to get ramming part of the supply chain, right?
It makes engineering a lot easier, like way the fuck easier. And that's going to reduce that by itself. I'm sure engineers are a huge chunk of game costs right now.
When you say engineering, do you mean like
all parts of it?
Game engine
like
engineers?
Any coding is so much easier with AI. Even understanding a code base of like a giant complex game, you can ask the AI, hey, can you tell me how often this cache is refreshed? And I don't have to dig through the code. I can just ask the AI and it tells me. How does this system work? I can explain it a lot better than me asking 3 different humans who all only know one part of it.
So, I guess this might just be like a me problem, but we spend way more money on our artists than we do on our engineers. I realize it's hard to talk about a piece like this because there's no thesis. I guess his thesis is that costs are rising too quickly, but I agree with your guys' like market competition. Okay, marginal cost is going up because marginal benefit is going up, not because like
He's reasoning from cost change, which I think is very dangerous. Like costs are a response to demand. Again, you have to look at margins for his argument to be true. I find it really unlikely that there's been all this economic profit sitting around, and what we're seeing now is people are just bidding out that economic profit. I find also unlikely.
I do think people are much more prone to think about fixed costs than they are to think about the marginal costs. Like a lot of these costs are because they're investing those resources. They're investing an additional person towards this task. But yeah, he doesn't really have any hot takes on AI. Talks about a coming correction. I don't know if I'm convinced of a coming correction, but I feel like I'm probably a bear when it comes to the impact of AI on gaming. I just like, and I would love to be proved wrong. I see the way that people are using it in my company. I see the way that people are talking about it. Oh, what if Lord of the Rings was remade, but it was Taylor Swift? It's okay, that's great, but you also needed fucking like the whole movie to be made before you could make the Taylor Swift version of Lord of the Rings. So I haven't really seen like anything that has made me. Is my workflow quicker than it was before? Yes. Am I able to do 50% more analysis now with AI? Yes. Are the engineers probably twice as productive? Yes. I don't think that fundamentally changes anything, though. I also don't think it has any impact on the consumer base.
Yeah,
so,
I agree. I don't think it's like
I don't know.
mobile phones or internet level of revolution for sure. Dude, I feel like AI is this like black hole topic where every time it
And then
comes
my
up,
hot
we just...
My hot take on the cost thing is that I think that there's like probably a competitive advantage to be had by creating a product that is to the consumer mostly the same. Maybe it's got fewer bytes, but Claire Obscura Expedition 33, 30 gigabyte file. It's still like a 30, 40 hour game. It's an amazing experience, looks amazing, but you wouldn't know that it's half or 25% the size of a new Call of Duty game.
I like the law theme for this episode too.
So, all right, I gotta run, guys.
We should teach this to our children. Economics is major. Everyone has to major in economics. Number one, for personal survival. Economics is major.